Mr. Speaker.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased also to speak to this bill. It is an interesting bill. It's been around some time. It's had time to mature, clearly. The Greens are supporting it because it does some good things, some necessary things. Time and technology move on. Technological developments create new opportunities for criminal elements to offend and to find ways to extract money in ways they ought not to do. We are, however, in common with our Labor colleagues, we are disappointed by this bill to the extent that it fails to do something that it could do, and that is clearly about this notion of bribes. And I will avoid the language of facilitation payments. It's such a dainty expression. It simply overlooks or seeks to disguise the fact that actually you're talking about bribes, small bribes, perfectly formed little bribes, but bribes nonetheless. And I'll say more about that in a moment or two. So this bill does some good things, as I said. Among other things, it will make it much more difficult for people to launder money through improper transactions and passing money through the banking system by various ways and means. It was quite an education, I must say. Some of the early submitters to the Select Committee were the banks and some of the major financial interests. And it was genuinely interesting to hear about novel ways people do find to work electronic systems that to most of us look to be quite impregnable, quite bulletproof. We did raise some concerns, as did others, about the very low level of reporting. A $1,000 remittance overseas by a New Zealander will be tracked, will be recorded. It seemed, I can't recall now the number of transactions that represents in the course of a year going through the banks. Most of them, the vast majority of them, legitimate, but it was many millions of transactions. That is a difficult challenge technically for the banks, and they got somewhat nervous, I think, about the commencement date initially, making a very good point. They needed to develop their software, their systems to accommodate that level of reporting. There was no opposition as such that I could see. They were simply concerned about their ability to meet the requirements of the bill. So those matters were dealt with. I continue to have some unease about the level of data that's been gathered here. As we know, massive data banks, information about people's banking, their transactions, can have value in all sorts of ways, not least of all for commercial reasons. I discovered recently when visiting Spark in Auckland that there is a new and interesting profession called a data scientist. People who can manage these massive databases, extract information from them, discover patterns and trends within them. And I'm sure the police will do this for very good reasons, for good and sound reasons. They'll be looking for the patterns and trends that represent offending in some way. But equally, that information is vulnerable to being mined, to being manipulated and applied for purely commercial or other reasons. And for that reason, I guess we'll continue to have some level of scepticism about these massive databases, and we'll want to be assured, I guess, that over time they will be managed, they'll be eliminated, whatever it takes to protect individual privacy. The bill does some very useful things around people trafficking. It tidies up our law, it stiffens up some of our regulations. It makes people in New Zealand, it criminalises actions in New Zealand even if the offending is carried out overseas, and that's as it should be. New Zealanders should not be exempt from offences or from liability for offence simply because what they're doing is not currently criminalised in New Zealand. As I said, though, where we part company with this bill, it is a perfect opportunity, this legislation, when it does deal with matters around money laundering, about bribery, about anti-corruption measures, to remove the section in the Crimes Act that allows for these so-called facilitation payments, these small bribes. And we've heard a number of justifications about why that's okay, and they're common enough justifications. The pragmatic argument, and Mr Bakshi made that in all honesty, that yes, if you want your business matter to progress, you might have to slip somebody a few dollars or whatever the currency is in order to progress that. But that is simply a bribe, and it also embeds in that culture the notion that it's okay. Often the history of bribes and corrupt money exchanges is about the fact that people are not properly paid to do jobs, not least of all in public service in other countries, where the income levels are so low that actually the bribes supplement the income and allow those people simply to do well, or at least to have decent lives, and of course potential to accumulate large fortunes. So I think the pragmatic argument fails. I think we as a country with a very good reputation as a transparent country with very, very low levels of corruption should exercise some leadership and not be afraid to simply say openly and publicly, even in environments where bribes are commonplace, to say, no, we don't do that, we don't go there. And I think we would be supporting those countries, and two of the countries with the most serious problems around corruption in the world are China and India, two countries that are important trading partners for us. I think we could stand up and be the example in a sense. Yes, it's true that some countries do allow for facilitation payments, though it's interesting to note that typically the regulations, the laws in those countries, like Australia, like Canada, are actually tougher than ours. I think the provision in this legislation to require reporting of facilitation payments of small bribes brings us or catches us up with Australia, where that's already obligatory. The penalties in those countries for overstepping the mark in terms of bribery internationally, bribing foreign officials, are more serious than ours. It's interesting to note that only 44% of companies in the NZX 50, have policies prohibiting bribery, and 18 have policies that regulate facilitation payments. Compare that with the UK, with the top 100 companies there, 72 explicitly prohibit giving and receiving bribes. The figure in Europe is around 57%. Only 5 companies in New Zealand on the NZX have codes of ethics that prohibit facilitation payments. Where, as I say, we have a very good reputation as being a country with very low levels of corruption. We also have a reputation as a clean, green country. I think Transparency International is something of the Mike Joy, in the same way that Mike Joy is blowing the whistle on our water quality, on the fact that our environment is not pristine. In the same way, Transparency International is blowing the whistle on the fact that to the extent that we continue to accommodate and accept and even legally allow for these small bribes, we are undermining our reputation. It's interesting that Transparency International, the patron, once heard Don McKinnon, who we heard mentioned in an earlier debate today, a former MP of this government, the national government, a Deputy Prime Minister, if my memory serves me, is patron of Transparency, who are putting very, very strong, lobbying very hard for us to include in this bill the removal of that clause in the Crimes Act. They put out a media release just a day or two ago, which I hope some members have seen, and I would encourage those who haven't to go and have a wee look at it. I think I was the only MP who attended a seminar, a workshop over at Victoria University, hosted by Michael Macaulay. I can never recall the name of his school or department. It's the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies. He calls himself a professor of corruption. It was an excellent presentation from him, from Transparency, that put up, I think, an undeniable argument that facilitation payments are bribes. We ought not in New Zealand to have provision in our legislation that enables New Zealand companies to be involved in bribing foreign government officials. It's not the moment now to mention it, but I will anyway. In the committee stage, I have lodged an SOP that seeks to remove that provision from the Crimes Act, and I would encourage government members to have a look at that. Read what Michael Macaulay has had to say, read what Transparency International is saying, what the Human Rights Commission is saying, and give some serious thought to whether now's the time to actually to enhance our reputation as a country that does not tolerate corruption. Kia ora.